Thanks. All right, thanks. Can everybody hear me all right? Again, I just want to thank the center for having me here, and we'll kind of look at some of this large carnivore management in Wyoming, and this will be kind of a 50,000-foot view of our monitoring, our research, and then we'll finish up with a little bit of conflict in our Bear Wise program. So when we say large carnivore in Wyoming, it's 4 species. We're looking at black bears, grizzly bears, mountain lions, and wolves. And as a department, there's certain things that we want to look for when we manage, what we want to research, but we also want to look at what are the public values around those species. Our role basically is to maintain viable populations of each species in suitable habitats, and that's not just where they're biologically suitable, because we all know there's a lot of spots that are biologically suitable, but we also have to be conscious of where those are socially suitable, and where we can apply those science-based approaches into managing those species. We want to be proactive about mitigating wildlife-human conflicts, and you'll see later in the slides is that's an ever-growing aspect of what we do with the department, is these species, not just grizzly bears and wolves, but as all these species recover and expand, they're moving into more heavily human-dominated landscapes, and it's our job to try and make that work. We strive to include local expertise, those public desires of what the people want, and those attitudes developing our objectives and making management decisions. And then we also want to provide that information and education on both the large carnivore species management and as well how do we safely live with these animals. But everything we do as a section and as a department is not mutually exclusive. So we use our monitoring and research and our conflict resolution data to better understand these species as a whole and how do we manage them as a whole. We want to be proactive with our efforts and educational programs, both within our communities, but also through our Bear Wise Wyoming that reaches the whole state and in some cases a national and international audience. And it's a team approach. So we have a large carnivore section in the state, and there's 10 of us that are basically dedicated to nothing but large carnivores. But that's also always bolstered by public support. Although when it comes to the public, as you guys know, there's a wide spectrum of viewpoints. And so we have to sift through both the polarity of it, but also just the emotion around each species. And of course, some species have a little bit of more emotion around them than others. So how do we go about what we do and how we manage? And it differs between each species. So if we look at black bears and mountain lions, the primary method that we use to assess the populations is through trend through our harvest data. So we're looking at things like, looking at things like average age of harvest. So if we're harvesting for, say, mountain lions, and that average age is 5.5 years old, and over a 3-year period we see it fall to 3.5, we know we're probably digging into that population a little bit too much. But we also want to look at things like how many females are getting harvested. And we're able to tell what the population's doing by not just the female, but adult females within that harvest. When it comes to wolf and grizzly bear monitoring, it's a bit more intensive, and that is basically because of either the current listing status of those animals or previous listing status, and we have agreements that we have to meet with that. But all the large carnivores are managed based on their ecology, their densities, the roles in the ecosystem, and it's all a whole lot different than pretty much any other big game species we deal with. So I'll start off, and I'm going to go through the monitoring of each species a little bit before I get into the conflict, but just kind of that quick view of what we've done lately in the last few years, and hopefully kind of where that's going to go and how that leads us to better management. So these mountain lions are, of the 4 species, definitely the most secret of any of the animals that we go after, and they're definitely the hardest one to put a number to. We've been continually evaluating those tools that we can use in conjunction with our harvest data to better understand what these population trends are doing, especially as it's across differing habitats within the state. So this is a map of harvest, basically. And so it gives you an idea. So even though we have lions basically across the whole state, they're not harvested evenly across the whole state. So we want to quantify that harvest and look at the overall mortality density, not just harvest, across those differing habitats. And so if you see as it gets more red or brown, that's really high density areas. And that can be not only just hunting related, but that might also be conflict related. So if we look at that southern bighorns, I mean, obviously that's a really high domestic sheep dense area, and so it's an area we manage for conflicts, but also in the Black Hills as well. We run that on a 3-year cycle, so we look at what the population or what the harvest doing every 3 years, and that allows us to look at a pretty good short-term trend, and it gives us an idea whether that population's getting dug into too hard or not enough. And then that pressure, as you can see, it is delineated across those habitats. So kind of some neat work that we're just finishing up, and I don't know if any of you know Justin Clapp, who is our statewide mountain lion biologist, and he's finishing up his doctorate and writing up the final results of this study. But from 2019 to 2023, we had a capture season in the Casper area. And this was in collaboration with the University of Wyoming and as well as some other research partners. But the main focus of this study, and it's a question a lot of people have been asking, is what is the role of predation in CWD? Are these animals targeting CWD positive animals? Are they lessening the risk of disease transmission on the landscape? And what does that look like just as we manage mountain lions? So we collared 26 lions and monitored those 26 lions over a 4-year period. And they were collared with GPS collars so that we could investigate feeding sites. As soon as those collars would start to cluster points, we'd send in a crew to look at that site and decide whether that's a bedding area, feeding site, and if it is a feeding site, is it something that we can get a viable CWD sample from? And over those, we looked at 1,200 feeding sites, or clusters with 745 feeding sites, but we were able to get 220 viable CWD samples. And we're looking at both deer and elk and how those animals are using those deer and elk. So this is just a map of some of the clusters that we looked at, and this is Casper Mountain, Muddy Mountain, and the Bates Hole area. And the green is deer kills, and the black is elk kills. And we actually... the bummer part of this study was we lost some access on the east side of Casper there where the lions that were killing the majority of elk were living. And so we really didn't get the elk sample we wanted, but we had to work with what we had. And so you can see where that is distributed across those two mountains. What we found was about 50% of the kills were deer and 24% elk. And then you have the small prey, pronghorn, and some coyote mixed in. And kind of interesting, this was across a whole age range of animals. So I'll show you one really neat thing that came out of this that's not quite related. And keep your eyes out for the CWD results, because that should be within the next few months. Those are coming out. But one thing we did learn, coupled with a couple other studies we'd done previously, was as both sexes, males and females, as they age, you see that amount of deer within their diet lessens. So they start getting above 5 years old, and they start primarily eating elk. And so it was one thing we learned, especially in these areas like Casper, where we see an explosion of elk and the population's getting a little out of control, that maybe lions could be used to try and bring that elk population back down. Currently, we're moving on to the Wyoming range, and we tried to start our captures last year in that winter of 22-23, but as most of you know, it turned into Snowmageddon down in the Wyoming range. And so it was a very, very short capture season, but we were still able to capture and collar 3 mountain lions to begin that project. Even though we backed out early, we were able to fire back up this past winter, and we bolstered that sample size to 12 animals. And we currently still have 10 mountain lions on the air. We had 2 of those were harvested over the winter. But this is to evaluate that fine scale movement of how are these lions moving in relation to migratory mule deer. So we want to look at how are they using mule deer both on the winter range and the summer range, and are they targeting those intermediary areas in between the two spots? Or are they actually camping on those migration trails and using those migration trails? And so it's a new project. I'm pretty excited to be a part of that. And we should see some results from that a little further down the road. And again, that's in collaboration with not only the University of Wyoming, but the Pinedale, Jackson, and Green River regions of the Game and Fish. And this is just a quick view. That's the Wyoming range, and this is a few of the lions that we have on air. So you can see this winter how they were using right against the base of the Wyoming range, and then coming out into those mule deer winter ranges such as Cowpet and Lower Cottonwood Creek and the Piney Creeks as well. So how do we take this monitoring and move it to management? Well, we want to understand how these predator-prey relationships, especially when it comes to a multi-carnivore, multi-prey system, how are those working? And this is of high interest to the public, not just in Wyoming, but also all over the West. You know, we're going to continue to work to evaluate the role of apex predators, especially when it comes to CWD transmission, the prevalence, and how we can use those animals to maybe lessen that prevalence or lessen the chance of it transmitting. You know, when it comes to mule deer and lions, there's always a hot topic button there. And we do want to evaluate how does lion harvest relate to mule deer populations. And we're finding it's not so nuanced as just killing deer to save, or killing lions to save deer. So wolf monitoring. I think this one's got a little bit of a typo, but 2023 I think was actually the 19th consecutive year that Wyoming has exceeded all that prerequisite delisting criteria. And we still continue to annually develop harvest regulations and implement wolf hunting seasons, which is a little bit different than we saw with lions. So instead of every 3 years, we're able to look at this population annually and be able to develop where our goals and our management ideas want to go annually. Last year we had about 28 wolves harvested in the trophy game management area in Wyoming. We do use radio collars every year. We'll put out collars every year in Wyoming, and this is a great tool for us, especially when it comes to being able to look at pack size and document reproduction, and that's mainly to meet our agreements to have. I think it's 100 wolves and 10 breeding pairs, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute too. But we also can evaluate where they're going, territory size, where those territory boundaries are, where are their movements in relation to these ungulates, especially along winter ranges and summer ranges. And then we can assess survival and mortality. And then when we do have conflict, we're able to find these packs and manage these packs around conflict areas. So this is the 2023 map of packs in Wyoming, and you can see it's a pretty full habitat within the trophy game area. In talking about having these collars allow us to delineate these pack boundaries, but also to see what these packs do throughout the year. And just a couple examples, this Thief Creek pack up here, they've camped in the Clarks Fork Canyon for several years now, and been pretty dominant force on the north rim of the canyon. Well, this winter, they moved out here and haven't hardly been back since. And so having seen that, we get that collar data in pretty real time. So what's going on there? And we were able to go in there and within a couple weeks figure out, well, the Shrimp Lake pack has moved out of the park, and they're now taking over a bunch of that north rim. In fact, they killed one of the Thief Creeks about a week and a half ago. Another kind of neat thing with it when it comes to dispersal, so this Oxyoke Canyon north of town here, we watched a wolf come out of there about 2 weeks ago, come all the way across, all the way, and he's about right there now in 2 weeks. And so we get to see some of this really neat movement. It allows us to see where this exchange between packs is coming, and also the strife between packs. But most of all, it gives us an idea of what territories are used up and what are not, and maybe where we're missing a pack. But as you can see, there's not a lot of room for packs left. So last year we collared 39 wolves across 18 packs within that trophy game management area. well, it's covered up, but that does include some packs that we help collar in Grand Teton National Park. Again, this winter, I think we put out another 40 collars, something like that. So we got a pretty robust collaring sample out there. A little bit on the wolf population status. You can see we've been recovered for quite a while. Let me see. Our minimum of about 100 wolves since about 2005. We've been above that. And the dark bars are when they were listed and light bars are delisted, just so you know. Our objective is 160 wolves, and the reason we keep that objective at 160 and not the minimum 100 is we also have an agreement at 10 breeding pairs. And if we manage wolves at 100 at the minimum, there's a really good chance we won't meet our breeding pairs. So by managing at 160 wolves, we have a pretty safe guarantee that we're going to have at least 10, if not more, breeding pairs. 2023 is not on here. We're just finishing up the write-up for that, but we're actually going to be a bit high this year. We're about 190 wolves and about 17 breeding pairs finishing 2023. And so we'll see how that works out as far as conflict, where those breeding status ends up, and just gives us some things to look at as far as management. And so one question we do always ask is, how does the population relate to conflict? And livestock conflict really is the majority of the conflict when it comes to wolves. And you can see when the population really came up high in that 2016, 2015 era, we saw livestock conflict go really high. But as we began to hunt and do some management actions early on 2017, 2018, we brought that population back towards objective. And really, we don't see a lot of cattle conflict across the state. And as a result of that, we don't remove very many wolves anymore because of it. So what does this monitoring leave to management on wolves? It gives us a really accurate estimate of the population size, which allows us to have a really refined harvest management scheme. And that helps us reach our objectives and our commitments when we're trying to demonstrate wolf recovery. Because it does have, as everybody knows, if you haven't been paying attention to the news lately, wolf management in Wyoming, it gets a lot of scrutiny. There's current and ongoing litigation, and probably will be for a long time. But then there's also interest in wolves in surrounding areas, especially with, for instance, Colorado now having wolves down there. But it does give us that fine scale movement where we can evaluate and have some insight in these interactions between wolves and ungulates, wolves and other wolves, other large carnivores, and then also this humans and livestock conflict. It's a little bit of black bear now. Since about the late 90s, there's been a really strong growing interest in not only black bears, but black bear hunting and black bears in general. And it's led to an increased opportunity for black bear harvest and hunting. And a lot of our research and management has been kind of geared towards that. And are we doing the right thing when it comes to raising this black bear opportunity? So in 2015, we implemented some monitoring in the form of capturing and collaring a few bears to look at home range sites, but also putting together these hair snare sites. And so these bears climb through, look for the bait. There's no harm to them, but they leave a snag of hair. And so by doing that, we can go and pick up this hair and do a genetic analysis and basically fingerprint all these bears that come through these sites. And that allows us to build a density model. And so we look at a few of the areas that we've done around the state. Would be the Grays River was our first one at 6.8 bears per 100 square kilometers. And then we moved to the Sierra Madres, which was about 11 bears. And then the Bighorns, and we did the Laramie Mountains at the same time, but Bighorns were about 9.5 bears per 100 square kilometers. So we're able to go by bear unit and look at what are these bear densities across the state in differing habitats. And then this will eventually lead us to where we can evaluate population trend and see if our harvest data is tracking with that population data. One of the main research events that we've been doing in the state was in the Bighorns, and this was by Emily Davis. And I don't know if some of you, she's been giving talks around the state, and she she can speak to this far better than I can. This was one project that I wasn't really much of a part of, but she was with the University of Wyoming getting her master's, and she was looking at home range, dispersal, and just the general ecology of bears. But she was also evaluating bear movements in relation to baiting and bear baiting for hunting. And so we've been able to start to look at some of what she was bringing to the table and evaluate that in relationship to what we were seeing on the ground with harvest. And I would expect you're going to see a lot more of this type of stuff come through, and so that we can further evaluate how bears are using these sites. We're getting ready for our first revisit, which is going to be pretty interesting, back to the Grays River this summer, and we're going to go back to doing some hair snare work again to evaluate, okay, so we know we were about 6.8 on the first go around, so how many bears per 100 square kilometers are we? Are we still right in there where we thought we should be? Are we up? Are we down? Which should allow us some management flexibility one way or another with black bears. All right, on to the big guys. So, you know, grizzly bear monitoring has been going on for a long time in the ecosystem, close to 50 years now, and we're going to continue to implement and adapt some efforts that have been used for a long time as we move from a preservation mindset to a recovered mindset to now we're really trying to shift into this management mindset, especially as we see this expansion move out into areas that these bears haven't been for 150 years, that are, quite honestly, the landscape's changing, not just for bears, but I mean, we all see the people moving in, and it's not just here in the basin, it's across the whole ecosystem, where you get off the mountain and there's a lot of people in a lot of new spots. And so we are a part of a team. It's the Interagency Grizzly Bear Study Team, and that's the 3 states, the U.S. Geological Survey, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, all working together to look at this population as a whole. But although with Wyoming we have the bulk of the population, so we also lead the effort for the monitoring of these bears. And some relevant boundaries before we start diving into it. Early on, a recovery zone was set up, and you see that red line as a recovery zone, and that's the interior, the core of the ecosystem, and that's where the greatest protections for the bear are. That's where we really want to see a lot of monitoring going on to see what the population's doing within that part. If we move out a little bit, we're in the demographic monitoring area, or the DMA, and that's roughly about 50,000 square kilometers, and that's representative of suitable habitat both biologically and socially, and we know this is where we can have bears for long term, or they're viable, they'll do well. We know we're always going to have bears outside of that, but the management's going to be a little bit different both inside and out. The overall grizzly bear distribution in 22 was about 70,000 square kilometers, so you can see we have a lot of area outside of the recovery areas where bears are distributed. One bonus of grizzly bears that we don't have with the other species is we do have a long-term data set. It's been one of the most studied animals on the planet, I think. We have a lot of long-term expertise and experience with the folks that are on the ground managing these animals, which can bring a lot of context to what's happening with the population. So guys that have been there 20, 25 years have seen a lot of change versus the guys that have been on the ground 5 years. But it does really epitomize this conservation success story that we have with grizzly bears. I think that managing this population is threatened into perpetuity. It's going to lead to a lot more challenges, and we can only have our hands tied for so long. One cool thing that we have started, and this is in conjunction with the Shoshone National Forest, is when we do research captures, for the longest time it's always been front country bears. Where can we get a pickup? Where can we put a trap that we can drive to? And we don't have a lot of insight into these backcountry wilderness bears that really don't ever interact with people. And so in 2021 was the first aerial captures in the lower 48 of grizzly bears. And basically we had a team from Alaska come in that's been doing this a long time and helped us aerial dart some of these wilderness bears and fit them with GPS collars so that we can look at these backcountry movements as well as these use of these moss sites, and but even sometimes between moss sites. That was a video that was pretty cool, but I don't think it's working. I'll see. Nope. See, this is what I get. All right, we're gonna skip it. But anyway, so all of this data that we collect with grizzly bears, it's all collected so that we can look at population estimation as well as what's happening within that population, and not just as a whole, but the different segments. So we want to look at what's happening with just adult females or just adult males or cubs of the year or yearlings. It's all evolved into this integrated population model, which allows us to project the population, what it's going to do, what we can expect, but it gives us a lot of predictability within that projection. And so we have actively monitored since the 1970s. Each animal that we capture and that we collar and we monitor, it gives us an insight into the entire population. So we're looking at things like survival, and especially with cubs of the year, young bears, are they making it? How old are they living to? Mortality, reproduction, fecundity, all these different things, especially body condition is a neat thing to see year in, year out. And I usually think I can predict what bears are going to do one year, and I'm usually way off, and I've kind of given up on predicting it anymore. But it's neat to keep that we have such a data set and that we can keep it going. And it does give us a lot of context with how we can manage into the future. One thing we did in the Cody region, it ended about a year and a half, 2 years ago, is we do pay for livestock that is depredated by wolves, grizzly bears, and mountain lions in this state. But a lot of the science that we're basing that on was getting pretty old. And so we had the opportunity to look at cattle depredation by large carnivores. And we had several ranches that participated in this in the Cody region. And over the course of 2 years, where we ear tagged these cattle, several calves, and both calves and yearlings within these herds, and then we were able to intensely monitor these cattle throughout the summer. And not only were we looking at what was getting killed, but we wanted to know, what are the producers finding out there? Are they finding everyone that's getting killed, or are they missing quite a few? Because part of our compensation scheme is paying for a multiplier in areas where it would be really hard to find these cattle. And so we wanted to evaluate, are we on the right path doing this? And to give an example, one ranch that we detected one summer, so there was 368 calves in that herd. And we radio ear tagged 108 of those. 4 of those marked were killed by grizzly bears, which is about 3.7% of what the marked calves were. So if we put that across the whole herd, that should end up being about between 13 and 14 total calves killed. Well, producers found 3 of those available, 13.6 available kills to find. So that gave us a compensation factor of 4.5 to 1. Currently, the state is paying 3.5 to 1. But, and I didn't put it in here, as we put all the data together across 2 years and several ranches, it actually came out to about 3.5 to 1. So scientifically, we were able to back up that, yeah, we're paying about what we should be when it comes to compensation. But all of that is kind of part of the reality recovery, and not just with grizzly bears. All these 4 species have begun to come back in really neat and great ways across the state. But with that comes conflict. So while I'd like to tell you that the corner around Bighorn Basin has the black sox coming out of it, the reality is this is what we find. And to give you an idea of what we mean by conflict, and the short version of this is it's interactions between humans and wildlife that results in property damage, agricultural damage, or public safety issues. And so we want to manage these human-wildlife conflicts, not only because it promotes tolerance for these species and gives the department support, but it also, human safety is absolutely paramount when it comes to living and coexisting with these animals. So if you look in the last 40 years, you can see through the 80s, conflict, and this is all 4 species together, conflict was pretty low. But then in the 90s, of course, as grizzly bears recovered, we had wolves back, lions began to expand their range through the state, even black bears to a lot of extent expanding. We see this really sharp rise in conflicts, and so we do know that as we have more of these animals on the landscape, we are going to have more conflict. If we look at last year, and this is across the whole state, we had 191 conflicts with black bears, 190 with grizzly bears, 31 with wolves, and 20 mountain lion conflicts. So a total of 432 conflicts. If we boil it down just a little bit to the Cody region, we had 135 conflicts in the Cody region. And you see our big one is grizzly bears here. We don't get the black bear, and I don't understand why we don't get the black bear conflicts other folks have, but we just don't. But we get our share of the mountain lion and wolf conflicts as relation to the whole. So what drives conflict? What drives that number, and why is it some years are high and some years aren't? Well, that can be social tolerance, whether that's real or perceived threats, but it also, in my mind, a big one is abundance of natural foods. So with bears, did we have a choke cherry crash that year, or did white bark pine fail, or just a whole range of reasons. But there's also that population demographics. So population size plays a big thing into it. How are those animals distributed? Age and sex structure. So are we dealing with a lot of really old animals, or are we dealing with a lot of really young animals? The two demographics that tend to have the most conflicts. But then what's the overall population health there? Is there some sort of disease? Is there something running through them? But it all leads to our field response program, which we have set up through the Large Carnivore Section. We have a whole section of guys, subsection of us that deal with conflicts. And that looks like conflict management prevention, whether that's getting out information and education that we need to the right people, or that's just simply securing attractants. And that can come down also to the management of individual animals. So do we need to haze that animal and just try and get it out of the area? Is it as easy as just deterring it away from an attractant or securing the attractant? Or do we need to capture and relocate or remove that animal? And then we also have the compensation program I was talking about, where we pay for agricultural products in order to help some of these guys that are getting hit pretty hard be able to survive a season. Especially, we have some producers that get paid $100,000 to $150,000 a year. I mean, they're getting hit pretty hard in some cases, and that's not every case. But the state with just carnivore compensation, we're $800,000 to $1 million a year we're paying. But that being said, we're paying that for deer and elk damage as well. So it's not just carnivores that are bringing that. One big thing that we really like to tout out there is Bear Wise Wyoming. And this has been around for 20 years. And the folks that lead this are really, really good, although this does boil down to a team approach. Everybody in the carnivore section takes their part in helping put this together. But these are the proactive efforts and educational component that really is the foundation for carnivore management. It's getting out true information and dispelling any of that misinformation that might be around about these species. Just some 2023 examples of what we did last year. Electric fencing, we're teaming up with Wildlife Services. They have a new non-lethal program that's bringing a lot of money into this state for infrastructure. And we've been working with them and the public to not only get the word out about this, but we're fencing beehives, gardens, chicken coops, hobby farms, anything that might be a bear attractant or something that might cause conflict. If we can put a fence around it, we're sure trying right now. The carcass management program here in Park County, and that's in partnership with the Bureau of Land Management, where if you have livestock that dies on your property, we pay somebody to come pick it up free of charge to you and haul it to the landfill, so you don't have that attractant sitting in your pasture or in your yard. Tons of outreach, thousands of kids, people every year we reach through different educational and informational events that we put on. And then we also have our newer Bear Wise webpage that I ask any of you guys to go check out on our new website. It's got some great info out there. And then our bear spray giveaways, which have become more and more popular. I think we're giving away anywhere from 800 to 1,000 cans of bear spray a year now, and that's been really popular. We usually run out at every event. We did develop an instructional video for using and deploying bear spray, and we're hoping to use that a bunch more here in the next upcoming years. And that'll go into some new things I'll talk about in a second. But some upcoming stuff what we got is everybody's heard about the corn maze in Clark and the work we're trying to do up there. Well, we are getting some funding together to finally put an electric fence around the whole farm. And so we're hoping to be able to not catch a bear there ever again. But it'd be really good for not only our workload, but just the security of the place and for the public up there. And that's in conjunction with Safari Club International Foundation and the Natural Resource Conservation Service. Some new stuff, some digital outreach that we're going to start with the Jackson Airport as kind of our pilot program. And we're looking at putting up some videos at the baggage claim for proper bear spray deployment. But also we're looking at having an interactive virtual reality simulator where folks can use bear spray in that without any risk. And it should be a really neat thing. But we're also looking at marketing some options for gas pumps, the video gas pumps you see around the state, where we can put some Bear Wise messaging out on those, so while you're filling up, you can mute us talking about how to use bear spray. And I have talked to Montana. Montana's really interested in doing that too, so we may have some partners with different states. And this is just some pictures of the Bear Wise in action. You see the free bear spray, some fencing, and of course we talked to a lot of kids. But there's our new Robo Bear, and that thing has been a hit if we can keep it running. It turns out that none of us are really good with electronics. So, but just some final thoughts. We are committed to maintaining and managing these carnivore species across the state in stable populations and stable habitat. It is a multi-layered approach, and everything about wildlife management is dynamic. It's ever-changing, and we have to be that way with it too. We want to maintain a vigilant conflict resolution program, as well as monitoring, as well as outreach and education, because all of those work together, not only for carnivore management, but for public tolerance to have these species as well. And we want to continue to understand these questions that are being asked by the public of large carnivores. And that, in a sense, gives us a more effective management approach. So I guess with that, I'll take any questions. Yeah.
Luke, can you define conflict?
Yeah, so I had it on a slide. It's basically any negative interaction between people, carnivores, that could lead to property damage, agricultural destruction, or an aggressive encounter. Basically is how that would boil down.
So before we get into questions, can we just give our speaker a round of applause? Thank you. And then Luke, if you could repeat the question so the online audience can hear us.
Yeah, and so that last one was just defining conflict. Yeah. Yep.
But how does that, have they missed their mother's training, or what has happened?
So the question is, lions coming in town tending to be younger and hungry or starving, and it can be. It really depends. It does tend to be younger animals, especially younger males, and they all typically are dispersal age, so they should have been old enough to leave their mothers. But it could be the habitat's full around them. Maybe they can't find a spot. They may have come from long distances too. So typically those younger animals, they'll disperse, especially males will disperse hundreds of miles from where they're born. So they may just be in an unfamiliar area and they just don't know how to hunt there too. But we do see more and more disease issues popping up sometimes, especially parasitic issues. And oftentimes those animals that are starving have pretty high parasite loads. So, yeah. Yeah.
I was interested in your slide on the ages of the lions and the changing prey as they got older. They started going heavily towards elk, but on the other hand, the older lions have tooth problems and other issues. Is it
Yep.
more efficient to get an elk, or
Oftentimes,
I mean, is that
yeah, there's more biomass there.
so the energy and effort, even though they might not be in great shape to get an elk?
Yeah, and I could actually, I should have referenced this when I was there, and I'll bring it up quick. So, these two lions, if you look at the top lion, he's about 3.5, 4 years old, and you can see his teeth. And he was living almost primarily on a deer winter range. That bottom lion is about a 10-year-old male, and we caught him off of an elk kill. So teeth, to me, I mean, if they know how to do it, I think teeth is pretty irrelevant. You look at that old gummer, and you wouldn't think he'd be able to eat a Slurpee, but he does. But yeah, it's really interesting, and it's pretty new information that we're really starting to look at. And I think it is something we're going to continue to look at in the future. Why is that the way it is? One of you back there, I don't know. Yes, both sexes. Yep. Yeah. So, yeah, well, no, not that we know of. Colorado did a recent study, which we kind of went in conjunction with in the CWD work, where they actively fed captive mountain lions CWD positive meat. I mean, really hot stuff. And on the first pass through the first scat, there was 3% of the prions left in the scat. And every pass through after that, there was 0. And so they're somehow sequestering those prions within their body and not passing it out into the landscape, and they're also not catching it. No. Oh, yeah.
What are the bear and wolf populations like in Sunlight Basin and the North Fork?
Pretty high. I don't have the numbers. We would probably know the wolf offhand, but I don't have it on me. But yeah, they're dense. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, repeat the question. Yeah, what are the wolf and bear populations like in Sunlight Basin area and North Fork? So, yeah. Yeah.
I had a black bear that was caught by Fish and Game out of Draper last year now, and it was a young bear, and it did kill one of my goats, and I was hoping that at least they would turn that bear loose out in the wilderness somewhere. It was just a young bear, they said it was a 3-year-old bear.
Oh, okay.
And someone in your management decided to kill it.
Right.
And I don't see why they could have turned a young bear out in the wild somewhere instead of killing it.
Right. So that management decision anymore is made based on not just the individual, but it's a population level look at it. And so we deal with enough conflict animals that are repeat conflict animals. Oftentimes when it comes to black bears, lions, and wolves, we just remove them because we know it's a high likelihood we'll deal with them again, especially younger animals as they learn it younger. That being said, if we can secure a spot, we'll try and secure a spot before we deal with it. So.
There's a question from online. I don't know if it's fully fleshed, but the question is, wolf management, there was a Congress vote yesterday. If it was enacted, how does it affect Wyoming? I'm not sure I have the context for it, but.
I'm not sure I know the answer to
Yeah.
that one. So, yeah. Yeah.
The relationship between the habitat conflict between the grizzlies and black bears. Do you get more grizzlies, do you get less black bears, or do they move out of each other's way, or are they kind of
You know, there is some work out there, and I don't know that we have less black bears because we have more grizzlies. You look at the black bear harvest, especially around the Cody area, and we harvest a lot of older black bears, nice older male type black bears. But there's also some work through the study team that shows that black bears and grizzlies are using the same landscape just at different times of the day. And so they've learned how to adapt to each other, you know, and obviously a grizzly will kill a black bear on occasion, but I don't know that it's a really big deal. So, yeah.
I'm gonna run a mic over for you.
Oh.
Or online.
Oh, sorry, I keep forgetting to repeat the questions.
What are we seeing on the moth sites these days? Numbers, where are the bears coming from? Where do they go back to? And
Yeah.
what can you tell us?
We could talk a lot about that. They're coming from long distances. We see a lot of the bears that are using lower elevations during the spring and even the fall. Those are bears that are moving back and forth, although not every bear uses them. So the last handful of years, we're counting over 200 bears on the moth sites. So they are using them at a pretty high rate, but at the same time, we have collared bears all over below those moth sites that never go to them. And so it is an important food source. They are using it, but not every bear is using it. We had one bear, for instance, we caught her, I'm trying to think how many years ago it was, at the Sleeper Ranch, basically, down the Lower Grable, east of the Highway 120. And we were able to monitor her for about 7 years. And every summer she would, from the spring, she would be down low out in the basin. She would move all the way to the head of Rock Creek to the moth sites. And then in the fall, go back out, eat out by the Sleeper Ranch in the fall, and then go all the way back to Rock Creek to den again. And so they are making these big movements. At least some of them are making these big movements, but certainly not all of them.
Luke,
Yeah.
thank you for talking to us, and I don't know if I misconstrued something that you were talking about with the CWD that the mountain lions consume, and they kind of keep it internal and they don't spread it. Here's my thing that I'm kind of cloudy on. Did you say, or have you thought about using mountain lions to be a deterrent for CWD by introducing them into different areas that have a high impact of CWD? Is that feasible?
Probably not. Honestly, in this state, they're already there. And so we don't have these spots that would be viable lion population with high CWD where the lions aren't already there. So the question might be down the road is, how do we want to use, or back off harvest even potentially? How do we want to use lions to control or lessen the spread and the prevalence of that disease? So, yeah, and I think in areas maybe across the U.S., it might be information for other states that want to use that. But for our state, they're pretty much there doing it already. Yeah, I'll repeat this one. I'll try and remember. Yeah. Ah. Yeah, so the question is, does electric fence deter grizzly bears and black bears? And the answer is yes. We have a lot of success with it. And in fact, if you looked at that slide where conflict started kind of the last few years really started to smooth out, I do think some infrastructure is really playing a part in that. We're not seeing those big swings of conflicts that we did for a long time, although I say that and this year could change my ideas on that. But, we're getting a lot more infrastructure, especially electric fence, out on the landscape, and permanent electric fence, and it's working great. These areas that we fence, we have very little conflict with anymore. Yep, absolutely. Yep. So, and depending on where it's at, we may have a program where we just pay for it all. And so there's definitely programs out there that either cost share or we'll come in and just get it fenced for you. So, yep. Yeah. Yep.
That 90 number that you had of conflicts in the Cody area, I was just wondering what are like the primary types of conflicts that you're seeing, and has that number changed over time, or is it increasing? What does that look like?
Yeah, so the number is the 90 grizzly bear conflicts in the Cody area last year, and is that changing over time? And it's stayed, I mean, within my tenure in the last 16, 17 years, it's stayed relatively stable. We do see some years where it spikes, but that's generally livestock conflict. So that's cattle depredation is the main driver of that. And of course there is, with bears, a lot of times the reason bear conflicts are so much higher than these other species is because there's other things like property damage, aggressive encounters, that sort of thing worked in. But it's, at least in the Cody region, it's definitely livestock. So.
Giving out bear spray, do you monitor how often that's used, how effective it is?
We try to. Honestly, we're not going to go ask everybody that gets a can. There's just too many of them out there. But we do get, when it is used successfully, we do get people that call us and talk about it, and we do document that. And it is an effective tool. And I could tell anybody, it's a tool for the toolbox. Some people might be more comfortable with firearm. A lot of people are more comfortable with bear spray. But I've seen it enough now that I'm proud to promote it. I think it's a great tool, and people should be carrying it. So.
Luke, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Didn't even drink your water.
Oh, you got it for the ride. So just a quick announcement that our next lunchtime expedition presentation is actually going to be not the first Thursday in June. It will be June 20th. Similarly, our July 1 falls really close to July 4th, and I don't think we're going to see you all here on the 4th of July. So we've shifted that one. But June 20th will be Dr. Michael Diemick, who presented once here before several years ago as a Draper After Dark program. He's been digging here in the Bighorn Basin, paleontologist for over 10 years, so definitely come check that out. And well as July 11th will be Dr. Scott Wing, who is a paleobotanist with the Smithsonian, the National Museum of Natural History. So definitely check those out, and we hope to see you then. Again, if you need to come find me for email, please do so. Otherwise, we'll see you soon. Thank you.